Alright, so now we're going to talk about soil texture. And before we talk about that, we kind of need to put it into some sort of reference. So, what is soil? Alright, well, soil is, on this side, whoop, right here. Soil is several things. There is the mineral or solids fraction, which is represented by this part of the pie right here. 45 to 48%, maybe more, of the soil, a good soil, good agricultural soil, is mineral component. And then there's the organic matter, which brings that up to about 50% with the mineral, so about 2 to 5% in a good soil. And then the other remaining half is a mixture of air and water. Hopefully, ideally, in a half and half type mixture. So you, in a really good soil, would have 25% air, 25% water, 5% organic matter, and 45% mineral. And that would be all by volume, not by weight. Okay, so, how do we get the air and water in there? That is just how the particles are stacked. So you grab a bunch of soil, a handful of soil, right? There's air and water in that. It's not just a bunch of soil. There's air and water in there. Plants need air and water. They also need nutrients, which are made available from the organic matter and somewhere in the mineral fraction. Okay, so the mineral, the texture, soil texture. Well, air, water, and organic matter don't really contribute to soil texture. They kind of do, but not really. What we're talking about the soil texture is sand, silt, and clay. So, sand, silt, and clay, these little guys up here, clay are the teeniest, tiniest particles. They're the little tiny guys. Clay holds a lot of water and also can be super compacted. Silt are the next tiniest guys, and they're not quite as tiny as clay. And they don't hold quite as much water, and they don't hold quite as much nutrients. And sand are the largest particles. And I'm sure you're familiar with what sand looks like. Sand is enormous, absolutely huge compared to silt and clay particles. Like, I mean, this doesn't even do it justice. This scale here. I mean, this is, imagine like a house and then a pencil lead. That's kind of the difference we're looking at. So sand, silt, and clay, when combined together, form texture. Soil texture is just the relative abundance of each of these sand, silt, and clay particles together. So you can go from a total clay to a total silt to a total sand to a combination of all three, which would be a loam. You can have a sandy clay, a silty clay, a silty sand, all of the above. There's a triangle you can look at to kind of figure out exactly what your texture is. But the most important part about knowing your texture, once you figure it out, is really this area, this little diagram here. And that is kind of, if there's all clay, like right here, your drainage is going to be pretty much low to none. And if you have a loamy mix of all three, the drainage is going to be pretty decent, not fantastic. And if it's all sand, you're going to have a really good drainage. And so what does that mean? Well, water will just flow through the soil in a sand, and in the loamy, it'll kind of sit and be more, it'll stay in what are called micropores and macropores. And in the clay, these will be totally saturated with water. But in your, like a loamy type thing, it'll be pretty much just micropores that are filled, and the macropores will be open and full of air. And so that will create that 25% and 25% air and water, which is what we want. And so why is that so important? Well, just by knowing whether you have like a sandy soil or a clay soil, you can then know how much water you can expect to have to add in the summer by, just knowing your soil. You can say, well, it's dry. I need to add a ton of water, or I can add a little bit of water. If you want to have a totally saturated soil or not so saturated, and that can be kind of argued, I guess, but it's good enough for that. And especially drainage is very important here. Some plants don't like to sit in a lot of water, so clay is not so good, and some plants like to have really good drainage, so sand is really good. But kind of a very important part about this is that you can't change your soil texture. Unless you want to spend a ton of money and waste a bunch of time, it's not really worth trying. But what you can do is improve your soil texture. And how you do that is by kind of improving your soil structure. And your soil structure is really just how your soil, each sandstone and clay, are all stacked and together and organized together. So as you can see right, this side, right here, we got some what are called aggregates, and these are little like sandy, silty clay particles that are bound together by organic matter, usually, or some sort of like fungal hyphae will hold those all together. Different like root exudates will do it, and worms, their slimy coating will cause this to happen. It just is like a little dirt clod, and they all stack up together, and that creates kind of like this sort of environment where it can allow these different macropores and micropores to exist. Where without the structure there, it could just be a bunch of little micropores, and then all you have is a saturated soil, and there's no air flowing through, and that's no good for your plants. So having soil structure is pretty important. And soil structure you can change. You can have an effect on soil structure. And so to do that, it usually means adding soil organic matter or manipulating soil organic matter in some way. And that can lead to the formation of aggregates, which is a great thing. Alright, so now let's talk a little bit about soil profiles. This guy is a soil profile. You generally have like an organic top layer, which is where like your leaf litter will sit, and then you'll have usually an A horizon, maybe a B or an E, and then C. Well, that doesn't really matter. What you need to pay attention to is whether you have a hard pan or not. Hard pans are where water will pool, and that can cause saturated conditions, and roots don't like that. Some plants really don't like to have that. Imagine you had a hard pan somewhere up here, and your roots only had 3 inches to work with on top of the hard pan. Well, your trees are going to top over a lot easier, and some of your more well-drained, soil-loving plants are really not going to do well at all. So that's pretty important to know. But really, what we're going to focus on in this talk is let's talk a little bit right here, your soil surface, and a little bit below that, where most of the organic matter is in the soil. So that wraps up soil texture and soil structure. I hope you got the good idea of it, but we're not going to talk about it anymore. Up next, we're going to talk about soil organic matter.